José Saramago was born in November of 1922 in Portugal in a small village called Azinaga, about 100 miles northeast of the capital city of Lisbon. He grew up in poverty, his family being landless peasants. After working for years as a farmer, Saramago's father decided to move the family to Lisbon in 1924, where he found work as a policeman. A few months later, José's older brother Francisco died. Although they now lived in the city, Saramago continued to spend much time back in Azinaga, staying at his grandparents' house. He was a successful student in primary school and excelled in the first 2 years of grammar school, but unfortunately his parents could not afford to continue sending him there as it was costly, so he spent the next 5 years in technical school, studying to be a mechanic. During this time, his curriculum still included moderate amounts of literature, for which he was very grateful. After graduating, Saramago worked for 2 years at a car repair shop. In 1944, Saramago was working as an administrative civil servant in the Social Welfare Service when he married Ilda Reese, a typist. They had their first and only child, Violante, in 1947. It was during the same year that Saramago had his first novel published, titled Land of Sin. In the 1950s, he began working for a publishing company, Estudios Cor, as a production manager, finally returning to the literary world, although not yet as an author. It was in 1955 that the man began to spend some of his free time translating other authors' works, an activity that he thoroughly enjoyed and would continue to do through 1981. Saramago published Possible Poems, a book of poetry, in 1966, which marked his true return to writing. He worked another job as a literary critic in 1967 and 68, and published another book of poems, Probably Joy, in 1970. In 1969, Saramago joined the Portuguese Communist Party following his very strong political views, which are manifested in his written works. The author divorced his wife in 1970. In 1975, there was an anti-communist backlash that caused Saramago to lose his job because of his political stance. At this point, he had no hope of finding a new job and decided to put his writing skills to the test, devoting himself to literature to see if he could make it successfully as a full-time author. This period of self-development and literary immersion turned out to be an extreme advantage for Saramago, as he published 5 novels and several plays and short stories throughout the next years. In 1986, he met the Spanish journalist Pilar del Rio, whom he married in 1988. She eventually became the official translator of his books into Spanish. Saramago published The Gospel According to Jesus Christ in 1991, which was nominated for a literary prize in 1992. But this novel was very controversial, as the Roman Catholic Church took severe offense to the very atheistic, ironic comments made in it by the author. For this reason, the church pressured the Portuguese government to block the book's entry for the prize. Saramago considered this act censorship, and as a result, he went to live in the Canary Islands in self-imposed exile for the remainder of his life. Here he published Blindness in 1995 and several other books as well. Saramago was awarded the Camões Prize in 1995 and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1998, making him the first Portuguese language writer to win the Nobel Prize. In all, Saramago has published 29 works and is a well-read and respected author throughout the whole literary world. The book opens with a man sitting in his car waiting at a stoplight. The light turns green and cars behind him begin to honk, but the man does not begin to drive because he has suddenly been stricken blind. Somebody helps get him home, and as soon as he gets there, he tells his wife they must go to the eye doctor because he can't see. The doctor is perplexed because upon further examination, the man's eyes seem to be in perfect condition. So what is the reason behind his blindness? Later that night, the doctor is researching to try to figure out what could have caused the man's peculiar case of blindness when he himself is stricken blind as well. Realizing that something very strange and unexplainable is going on, the doctor calls the Ministry of Health to inform them of the mysterious cases. Within the next 24 hours, several more of the same situations are reported, prompting the ministry to order a quarantine of all the affected individuals and anyone who has been in recent contact with them, as the blindness seems to be a contagious disease. The interesting thing about it, though, is that it is a white blindness. Instead of the affected people being in constant darkness, all they can see is a bright, impenetrable white all the time. The only vacant building to send the victims of the blindness is an old abandoned mental asylum. The place is in terrible condition, extremely dilapidated with barely any resources to speak of, not even running water. It consists of 2 wards, both of which have 6 rooms containing about 20 beds each. The left ward is for blind internees, while the right is for people who have been in contact with the affected but have not yet become blind. As the people on the right catch the blindness, they must switch over to the left ward one by one. The first group of people to be sent here consists of about 50 people. 7 of these original internees make their home in the first room in the left ward, and they are the main characters of the story. These characters consist of the first blind man and his wife, the eye doctor and his wife, a young girl who is a prostitute, an old man with an eye patch, and a young boy. Four of these people, the prostitute, old man, young boy, and first blind man, are all patients of the eye doctor and were in the waiting room of his office when the first blind man was there the day before. A very critical aspect of the story is that the doctor's wife maintains her vision throughout it. In fact, she is the only one in the whole country who never becomes blind, but claims to have lost her eyesight so she may remain with her husband. Soldiers have been placed outside the building to guard it, and as soon as the internees have settled in, they hear an announcement over the sound system from an officer laying out very specific rules for them to follow. They will receive their food rations each day in containers and can retrieve them from outside once the soldiers have retreated to a safe distance after delivering them. If at any point an internee seems to be trying to escape or attack a soldier, he will be shot, no questions asked. In fact, the soldiers are terrified of the internees because they do not want to catch the terrible disease, and as a result they are very on edge and paranoid throughout the book. The majority of the story takes place here in the asylum, as the internees struggle through day-to-day life, newly blind and with no outside support. It seems as if the government has deserted them. As more and more people begin to arrive, the living conditions become progressively worse due to the lack of space and resources. The stench becomes almost unbearable. At one point, an internee goes outside to ask the guards about the food that should be arriving, and he is immediately shot dead because the soldiers think he is getting too close. This is when the internees realize that they really are on their own, and it is them against the government. As time goes on, the rations become more and more meager, regardless of the fact that there are an increasing number of people that need to be fed. Internees begin to fight over the sparse portions of food, and at this point a sort of gang forms. The men in the third room of the left ward hijack all the food, and nobody else can do anything about it because one of these men has a gun, therefore holding all of the power in the building. One woman is so desperate that she thinks it would be better for everyone to die than to live like this, so she sets fire to a bed, knowing that it will spread and there will be no way to put it out. This causes absolute chaos in the building, and with hundreds of blind people trying to escape the flames, many get trampled to death. When the survivors do make it out of the wreckage, they are puzzled to find a completely abandoned city. The guards are nowhere in sight, so the main characters, who have become a sort of family throughout the story, decide to stay together and look for somewhere to live. They trek through the city, which looks and feels like a ghost town. There are groups of people just like the main group, who just move around the city from building to building looking for food. At their first encounter with another such group, the characters come to find out that everyone in the whole country is now blind. This is especially startling to the doctor's wife since she can still see. The whole city is in ruins, and several members of the group want to return to their respective houses to see if anything or anyone remains there. They all eventually make it back to the doctor's house and decide to reside there. Life is rough, with very little food and virtually nothing to do, and after a few days everyone is becoming restless, so they are overjoyed when their sight suddenly returns the same way that it was stolen from them, one by one. The title of the novel, Blindness, clearly embodies the whole book. It is a story of a whole civilization that is stricken by an epidemic of blindness from which almost nobody escapes. But the title is about more than just the actual physical blindness. It is through their sudden lack of sight that the characters of the book realize that they have actually been blind all along. Things that were important to them before the epidemic no longer matter, and they begin to question their previously held values. How can such trivial things matter when it is now a struggle just to survive each day? By choosing the title Blindness, Saramago is making a bold statement about our society. He is asserting that people tend to go through life in a daze, blind to the actual important things such as love and respect, only caring about appearance, status, and material worth. The author believes that we as humans live life without meaning, which is also a large aspect of the theme of the story. In keeping with this idea of maintaining a timeless, nameless society to make the story applicable to all people, Saramago also chooses not to give his characters names. As I previously mentioned, the book contains 7 main characters. The reader learns about the personalities bit by bit throughout the story, but by the end of the book they still feel like little more than strangers. The whole story is quite impersonal, which might be why Saramago decides not to reveal very much about the characters themselves, instead focusing on the message of the story. Of the 7 significant characters, there are 2 married couples. The first couple consists of the first blind man and his wife. The first blind man is very proper and likes to keep to himself. Even though the internees are all forced to live together in close quarters, he tries to maintain his distance as much as possible. When the gang demands that all of the women come to their room to perform sexual favors, The first blind man declares that his wife will not be subjected to the shame of giving her body to strangers in exchange for whatever. She has no desire to do so, nor will he permit it. Even though she refuses, nobody in the room will receive food. This instance exemplifies what little information the reader finds out about the man's personality throughout the story, illustrating his propriety. His wife, whom the reader learns even less about, is a very soft-spoken woman who does her husband's bidding. During the story, she takes her husband's side in all situations, whether he is right or wrong, and does all that she can to keep him happy. The other couple in the story, the doctor and his wife, are the two most established characters. The doctor, who advocates the idea of organization in all circumstances, is considered the leader of the group by the others, if only because they feel that he has some authority since he is a doctor. The doctor is followed by the rest of the group. He is always coming up with the plans and always keeps everybody in line. His wife, who is the only internee to retain her vision, is a very sympathetic and understanding character. She always has the best interest of the whole group at heart, and she uses her advantage of sight to do everything in her power to help the others. The remaining three characters are each very unique, adding to the diversity of the group. There is a young boy of about 7 years who was separated from his mother at the beginning of the story, and so has been taken in by the group. He rarely has much to say, besides the fact that he wants his mom. He gets very lonely and homesick, often crying in the middle of the night because he misses his old life. Then there is the girl who always wears sunglasses. She is an attractive young prostitute, but she makes the point that it is by choice. She does not do this because she has to. She maintains that she lives as she pleases and moreover gets all the pleasure she can from life. This girl is very independent and does not care what anybody else thinks of her. She also acts as the young boy's motherly figure, always watching out for him and taking care of him. The last character is an older man with an eye patch. Being the oldest in the group, he often asserts his point of view and assumes that others should follow him because he has the most life experience. He is also very independent and spends most of his time deep in thought. As unlikely as it may seem, by the end of the story, this man and the girl with the sunglasses fall in love. In the novel Blindness, Jose Saramago sets out to prove that people's lives lack meaning because over time, societal development has caused people to completely lose the element of compassion for one another. He illustrates his point again and again during the story through the despicable way that the characters are treated. He does this to make sure that the reader understands that if people want to once again have meaning in their lives, they must begin to care for each other instead of only themselves. To get this idea across, Saramago uses an epidemic of physical blindness to symbolize the way that humans are blind to the important things in life. This passage occurs at a point in the story when a gang forms in the asylum and holds all of the food hostage, not allowing anyone else to eat. It also illustrates the indifferent attitude of the government towards the blind people. Driven by the foolish hope that some authority would restore to the mental asylum its former tranquility, impose justice, bring back some peace of mind, a blind woman made her way as best she could to the main entrance and called out for all to hear, "Help us, these rogues are trying to steal our food." The soldiers pretended not to hear. The orders the sergeant had received from a captain who had passed through it on an official visit could not have been clearer. If they end up killing each other, so much the better, there will be fewer of them. The blind woman ranted and raved, as mad women did in bygone days, she herself almost demented, but from sheer desperation. In the end, realizing that her pleas were futile, she fell silent, went back inside to sob her heart out, and, oblivious of where she was going, she received a blow on the head that sent her to the floor. The doctor's wife wanted to run up and help her up, but there was such confusion that she could not move as much as 2 paces. The blind internees who had come to demand their food were already beginning to withdraw in disarray, their sense of direction completely lost. They tripped over one another, fell, got up, fell again. Some did not even make any attempt, gave up, remained lying prostrate on the ground, exhausted, miserable, racked with pain, their faces pressed against the tiled floor. Then the doctor's wife, terrified, saw one of the blind hoodlums take a gun from his pocket and raise it into the air. The blast caused a large piece of stucco to come crashing down from the ceiling onto their unprotected heads, increasing the panic. The hoodlum shouted, "Be quiet, everyone, and keep your mouths shut. If anyone dares to raise their voice, I'll shoot straight out, no matter who gets hit, and then there will be no more complaints." The blind internees did not move. Reading Blindness was a riveting experience because it was, in every aspect, so completely different than any other book I have ever come across. Jose Saramago truly created a different world in this story, and I was drawn in immediately. Although the author may be strongly influenced by his Portuguese heritage, there is no evidence in the book to support this because he chose to set it in a timeless, nameless city. He He did this for a reason, of course, which seems to be that so that people of all nationalities can appreciate it equally, and in this goal he is very successful. To maintain this atmosphere, Saramago also decided to keep his characters nameless instead of referring to them based on their appearance. He preserved this impersonal atmosphere throughout the story, so much so that by the end, the characters were still little more than strangers to me. This intentional distance was an attempt to make the reader focus on the message and meaning of the story rather than the insignificant details. While this strategy worked up to a point, after a while it failed to hold my interest. The theme of the story, that humans by nature are ignorant and lack compassion, is revisited again and again throughout it. Saramago's views are those of a realist, if not a pessimist, and at times it can become overbearing. This, in addition to the author's unique style, makes the book almost impossible to get through. The style in which Saramago chooses to write the novel is in very long sentences and paragraphs, without using quotation marks for dialogue, and instead inserting it throughout the paragraphs, using only commas to separate speakers. Although this is interesting at first, it gets old very quickly. One paragraph can take up to 2 whole pages, making the book seem intimidating with huge blocks of endless text. While there is a sort of rhythm and harmony to this type of writing, it is definitely something that made me set the book down at some points because it got to be overwhelming. Saramago also seems to be using very much symbolism throughout the story, but it is so obscure that, at least to me, it fails. Overall, while Saramago employs both interesting concepts and style in Blindness, I do not think that is worth trekking through the murky and oftentimes boring waters of the book. It seemed like a great read when I first picked it up, but after the first 50 pages I was regretting that decision. I applaud Saramago's effort to illustrate how dire a situation the world can come to if people continue to travel through life without meaning, but it was just too much for me. I would not recommend opening this book unless you have a very high tolerance for darkness and ambiguity.